Hi folks, in this video I just wanted to show you a few other things that we can do in pivot point mode and snap mode, and we're going to use the grid to actually measure out and create an object that is perfectly the size that we want. So we can actually use this grid and use the measurement of this grid to measure out our objects. So in order to do this, I'm going to create a cube. This is handy if we want to create like a floor or an object within Maya that we know exactly it needs to be 5 meters wide or 5 meters deep, whatever it might be. We can use the grid accordingly. So with that cube created in there, I want to jump to pivot point mode and snap it so it sits perfectly on the floor again. So again, it's hold down D to get to pivot point mode, and we're going to move this and snap it to this corner. So you want to hit snap to points. And now if we move this again with D held down, we can snap it to one of our bottom corners. Okay, we're now going to snap the cube to the grid. So I've turned off snap to point, turned on snap to grid. And again, if I click now, the cube will jump up and sit perfectly on the floor. If that didn't quite work for you and things were kind of floating about and it's kind of snapping to the grid but it's not on point, make sure you've got both turned on. So snap to grid, snap to point, click on this, and again it will do the same thing. So I've just snapped that so it's perfectly on the floor and it's sat perfectly within one of our squares. So with those turned off, what I now want to do is move this pivot point back to the center of the cube so that when I move, rotate and scale this, those tools will work in the correct way. In order to do that, you come up to modify and then center pivot. If you hit center pivot, it will jump the pivot point back to the middle of the cube, and now our move tool, scale and rotate will work in the normal way. Okay, what I want to do now is move these, resize this, but I want to measure it out. So let's say I want to make it 3 meters exactly and snap it. I can use the move tool in a slightly different way to do that. So if you double click on the move tool, and let's just reset the tool so we can all be looking at the same thing. Step snap is what you want. If you click on step snap and hit relative and 1, leave it as 1, that means that every time you move now, it's going to move out 1 unit, 1 Maya unit. So we can perfectly measure out our object to the size that we want. So let's say I want to make it 5 meters wide. I then want to pull this face and do the same thing. I'm going to move this out and make it 5 wide, and that way we can be perfectly snapping this and using the grid effectively to really measure out our object and make sure that we're working very neatly, using the grid effectively. It's just a nice way to work if you're starting to measure things out. So I suggest you have a go at repeating those processes and have a go at using the grid to measure out the objects that you're creating. Remember, if you want to turn this snap off and then make adjustments normally, you need to turn step snap off and then go back, and now when we make adjustments we can not be constrained to snapping 1 unit at a time. Okay folks, just a nice way of using the grid effectively.